Okay, everyone, we'll get started. Thanks so much. Please take a seat when you have a moment. Don't worry, we will make sure we have time to network and socialize at the very end here. All right. Um, I know we have some folks who are trickling in. I was told to expect that, so we're gonna get started, but we welcome everyone as they come in through the door here. Good afternoon. Happy Pride Month. On behalf of the Biden-Harris administration, it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to the Eisenhower Executive Office Building here at the White House for today's AA and NHPI Pride Month convening. Real quick, by raise of hands, for whom is it the first time visiting the White House? Love to see that. So my name is Kota Mizutani. I serve as a senior advisor for public engagement here at the White House, and I'm super excited about that because it is my job to welcome you all to the White House, to open up the White House to the public and make sure that you have access to the people's house. So thanks so much again for being with us. Before I go further, I just want to give a quick thanks to our co-hosts, the White House Initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, the speakers and panelists who you will hear from today. And I also want to give a special thanks and recognize Erica Moitsugu, who is sitting amongst the audience, trying to pretend that she's not one of the incredible leaders who's here at the White House. She's the first ever AA and NHPI senior liaison. So thank you for your leadership and for your years of work. And most of all, I want to thank all of you for being here, both the attendees we have in person, and we also have a remote audience tuning in from across the country. You can't see them, but they can see you, I think. So we welcome everyone here today. We're having this event because it is important to highlight the diversity within our communities. And a lot of the time when we talk about that within AA and HPIs, it's about our ethnic backgrounds, our nationalities. But of course, we know that it is much more nuanced than that. And so it's important for us to recognize all the forms of diversity that exist within our communities. And so that is the background for today's program. We have a stellar event for you today. And just to give you a preview, we will hear from key leaders from the White House who will share what we are doing and have done in this administration to deliver for LGBTQI plus Americans, including Cutie Pie. I learned that term only just a year ago, I think. Queer and trans Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians, and LGBTQI plus Asian Americans. And later, we will hear from an expert panel that I'm super excited about to have today. We will have in-person and remote panelists who will discuss and explore the unique and shared experiences and challenges that face all of our communities, LGBTQI plus individuals across our AA and NHPI communities. So thank you all again so much for being with us. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker today, Crystal Ka'ai, who is my colleague and my friend, and the Executive Director of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. Crystal.
Thank you, Kota, and aloha, everyone. Happy Pride Month. We are so thrilled to have you here at the White House, for all of those in person, as well as those of you who are tuning in virtually. As the Executive Director of the White House Initiative and the President's Advisory Commission on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders, we are so thrilled to be here with you today as we celebrate the extraordinary courage, resilience, and contributions of our Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander LGBTQI+ and Two-Spirit communities. Under the Biden-Harris administration, we have made it a priority to uplift the voices of all Americans, including traditionally underserved populations. And we've also worked hard to create a safe space to honor all Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander LGBTQI+ individuals, including our Cutie Pie communities that Kota mentioned. And that's why we are so proud to be hosting today's event. Since President Biden reestablished the White House Initiative and the President's Advisory Commission on AA and NHPIs 3 years ago, the Biden-Harris administration has leveraged the full force of the federal government to advance equity, justice, and opportunity for our diverse communities. And we're so thrilled and honored to have with us one of our commissioners, Dr. Reynold Samoa, who you will be hearing from later today, as well as a number of senior administration officials. This event really highlights our work to bring visibility to the needs of LGBTQI plus communities throughout all aspects of our work to ensure that everyone, regardless of how they identify or who they love, can live freely with safety and dignity. So you're going to hear from a number of really extraordinary speakers about the tremendous work that this administration is doing to support and uplift the needs and voices of LGBTQI plus communities. And you're also going to be hearing from some of our community leaders who are going to share their stories and again, highlight the tremendous work that is happening in community to address so many of the concerns and priorities of our LGBTQI plus communities. So without further ado, I just want to thank you all again for being here, for your time and effort, for your advocacy, and all that you do for our communities. And thanks again. Happy Pride Month. I'm going to turn it back over to Kota.
Thank you so much, Crystal. If you don't know, Crystal and I have the privilege, along with Erica Moritsugu, serving as the three pillars of our AA and NHPI engagement here at the White House. So thank you so much, Crystal. We have a very special guest next up that you will hear from. She is the domestic policy advisor to President Biden here at the White House and the director of the Domestic Policy Council. I'm pleased to welcome to the stage Neera Tandon.
How's everyone doing this afternoon? Good, good. It's so great to see all of you. It's great to see friends and advocates in the room. I want to say happy Pride Month to everyone and really grateful to be here with both LGBTQI plus leaders and advocates from the AA and HPI community and obviously both. So I just want to talk a little bit about the president's record on LGBTQI plus issues. And, really just standing back, I'm very proud to work in an administration where we have put LGBTQI issues front and center. It is front and center of our equity work. And we've really driven historic changes, historic rules, historic actions. Just over the last few months, we've put forward rules that reshape protections around education, access to education, healthcare, access to healthcare for all Americans. And at the heart of these rules, 1557, our Title IX work is a critical focus on making sure that LGBTQI plus Americans are truly protected. These are the most far-reaching regulations that have been put forward by any administration to be as inclusive as possible and really say that efforts to discriminate anywhere in the country in healthcare and education against LGBTQI Americans is wrong, and that the force of this administration will be there to protect this community. And so I am proud of the work of DPC, but the Department of Education, the Health and Human Services. And I would also note there's a variety of rules out from Health and Human Services, a very far-reaching set of protections for children in foster care. We know LGBTQ youth, particularly transgender youth, are really often placed at risk in the foster care system. They're placed at risk by being in situations where their foster family does not appropriately understand their needs, and sometimes can act in a discriminatory manner. So HHS did incredible work to create a structure for LGBTQ youth in foster care that's really provides for the needs of this very vulnerable set of people. And so there's far-reaching rules, but also particularly targeted rules that are focused on the protections of people. And in all of this work, as I said, we are thinking about these protections from our lens of equity. The president has made equity kind of cornerstone of this administration. We have two equity EOs. Our first equity EO at the beginning of the administration really focused on how we could take an administration-wide approach to equity. And then our second EO really drives down to each agency and creates an infrastructure within each agency to focus on equity, both with personnel and staff in the front offices, but also really driving a continual effort and focus on these issues. And front and center there is thinking about the intersection of communities and why it's important for us to recognize how we need to focus on the AA and HPI community, as well as the LGBTQI plus community, and really in those places where vulnerabilities cross sections. So communities where you see people of color who are also LGBTQI plus, we have to have a particular area of focus on that vulnerability. And so again, I am really proud to serve in an administration that is thinking about how we ensure protections for all Americans, that an administration that looks like all Americans, and an administration that is focused on taking the full weight of the federal government at a time where we see a lot more attacks against vulnerable people, particularly in the LGBTQI community. How do we use the full force of the administration to protect those who are the most vulnerable? And with that, I will turn it back to you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for sharing those updates on what the administration is doing to support our LGBTQI plus Americans, including LGBTQI plus AA and NHPIs. Next, I'm thrilled to welcome to the podium another great advocate for our communities here at the White House. He is the director of the Office of Presidential Personnel. I think we've joked before that if you want a job here, to send the resumes to you. I don't know if I have the liberty of making that joke, but please join me in welcoming Gautam Raghavan to the stage.
Thank you. And yes, send the resumes. I'll get to that in a bit. But thank you for being here, everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces and old friends in the room, and it's great to be with you. And I just want to say, and I'll say it again at the end, but thank you for everything you do to advocate, to build power, raise visibility, hold us accountable. All of these are important aspects of the work that you do, and we appreciate the partnership. I'm also thrilled to be in the company of so many fabulous AA and HPI LGBTQIA plus folks. We have all the letters, folks, in our community. And I have to believe the reason we have all the letters is because we have a lot to say. And I think we have a lot to say about resilience, the kind of resilience that many of you and your families have experienced, whether it's your immigration story, if you're a naturalized citizen like I am, where you grew up in another country and moved here as a kid, or maybe it's the resilience that comes from your own experience coming out and becoming both authentic and your search for happiness in this country. I think we have a lot to say about creativity and insight and connectivity, which is born from living life at the intersection of many different identities. And I think we have a lot to say about community and allyship. You'll hear about this more, obviously, but our communities face many of the same challenges, right? So bullying, violence, health disparities, challenges with data collection and disaggregation, so much more. But we also know that none of our communities are monolithic. Each of those amazingly fabulous letters I listed at the beginning has its own story and has its own challenges. But we also know that we're stronger together. And I think this group, this gathering, is proof of that concept. But look, here's the hard truth. If you are LGBTQIA plus and AA and HPI, by the time you get to the end of June, you're just tired. Ben knows. You're like, because it's 2 months. 2 months of celebration and cultural events and panels and being in community, and it can be exhausting. If you're an extrovert like I am, it's still like by the time you get to the end of June, you're like, boy, I need a vacation. I know this from firsthand experience. When I was here at the White House before, in the Obama administration, I served as President Obama's liaison to both of these communities, all of our communities. So I can tell you, it's tiring. But we appreciate you being here at the end of the month, and especially to the staff for the incredible organizing and facilitation. And one of the reasons we have Heritage Month and Pride Month is to take stock, right? To step back and say, where have we been? Where are we now? Where are we going? And despite the challenges we face, I think we have a lot to celebrate. And for me, every single day, I celebrate the privilege of being able to serve the President of the United States, not in spite of who I am, but because of who I am. I don't take that for granted. And I don't take it for granted that every single day we have a president and a vice president and administration that is fully in our corner, especially in such uncertain times when we see, the forces of hate coming for our people. It really matters that we have allies in the White House. For the very first days of this administration, you've seen the president and vice president use every tool in their toolkit. You heard so many of that from Neera. Executive orders, policy guidance, symbolic actions to show solidarity for our communities and to stand with us. And all that is incredibly important, and implementing it, making it real and making it stick requires people. So my office is the Office of Presidential Personnel, and we have the incredibly fun task of helping the president build his team of about 4,000 political appointees across the administration. And in our office, we have a saying that people are policy. And we say that because, as I said, we believe that real lasting change isn't just about laws and regulations and policy. It's about if we want change that is good for all Americans, then we need to have a government that represents all of us. On his campaign, Joe Biden promised to build an administration that looks like America, and as president, he has. We've seen that historic representation in the cabinet, where we have four, that's right, AAPI women serving in the president's cabinet, his vice president, the U.S. Trade Representative, Secretary of Labor, the Director of Office of Science and Technology Policy. And as you all know, for the first time, we also have an openly gay member of the president's cabinet with Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. And across the executive branch, we have the most diverse administration in history. I'm going to give you the numbers because I love them. 57% of our appointees are women. Over 50% are people of color. 1 in 3 is like me, a naturalized citizen. And 14% self-identify as LGBTQ+. Think about that. When I first came to DC 20 years ago, as a young gay man navigating, coming out at the height of the sort of national battle and discussion on marriage equality, I could never have imagined this kind of representation in my federal government. I couldn't have imagined an event like this either, to be honest. But what I know and I've learned from personal experience is that our progress requires our continued participation and presence. So all of us, right, no matter what you do, have the capacity and the power to leverage the institutions we work for, to leverage people, to meaningfully improve the lives of people here in America and around the world. That is a huge gift and also a huge responsibility. And so my ask for you is this, going back to the resume part, join us. We're going to be building and expanding this administration every single year that we have the privilege to do so, all the way until the end. And so perhaps you've never imagined working at the White House or working in the federal government, but you don't have to imagine it anymore. You've seen examples, and my colleagues, you're going to hear from Kay in just a second too. We are proof that we are here, we are queer, we are committed public servants, we can do a lot together. Or perhaps you've never been asked, because so many times people don't get asked to serve. And so I'm asking you to consider service. Our voices, our stories, our lived experiences, our brilliance and our resilience, it's all needed now more than ever. So I would ask you to go to whitehouse.gov, scroll down, apply, submit your application, or find one of us and let us know that you're interested in serving. Because here's the thing, is we know change can be undone. We know that progress isn't sort of like promised to us. We sort of have to take it and make it happen. And so however you choose to show up, whether it's organizing your community or advocating for state or local change or in the private sector, wherever it might be, or here, obviously here in the federal government, I just want to say thank you. Please keep showing up. We need you. And I look forward to the continued partnership. Thanks. Back to you, Kota.
Thank you so much, Gautam. I'm pleased to move to our final speaker, last but definitely not least, who is also sitting in the audience, being incognito here. The Principal Deputy Director for Policy with the Office of Science-Based Science Technology Policy, Kei Koizumi.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, this is good. I am so happy we're having a group photo after all of this, because I'll get to why. So I'm Kay. I'm the Gaysian here. I love your shirt. I have one like that. In fact, well, I've lived it. So, I've been wearing it my whole life. And well, today I want to talk about, well, why people are policy. I'm going to turn it around a little bit. If people are policy, and that is true, policy is also people, and policy is also personal. And that's why it's so important that we are here, that so many of us are here today in Washington, D.C. So let me tell you a little bit about my corner of policy, Office of Science and Technology Policy. What we do is we advise the president and other White House officials on science and technology, on all matters where it would make a difference. And that includes not when we're just talking about science and technology, although that's important, but also how science technology can inform and contribute to solving some of the challenges we have in health, in our society, in security, and our economy. So that's one job that we have. Another job we have is to make sure that we have a world-leading science and engineering enterprise here in the United States that generates new scientific knowledge, new technological options for dealing with our challenges, and data and evidence to inform everything that we do. So that's a lot to do. Today, I want to focus on one part of that, which is the data. So I'm a social scientist, and I know that if you're going to do research about people, you need to know about people. You need to know about the many dimensions of who we are as people, where we come from, what we care about, how we identify. And so for me, it's important that I bring, my background as a gay Japanese American social scientist to this work, because it informs my work every day and in every way on behalf of all of us here in this room. So most of you, especially if you've been around long enough, you know that over the decades, we have been making great strides in being able to see the full dimensions of our Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community. I used to be that it was one box, Asian American, but I hope you've noticed that in the past, more recently, we've been able to disaggregate that data to find out more about us as Japanese Americans, as Native Hawaiians, as Filipino Americans, etc. And that's important. For example, in science and engineering, we know that in science and math, Asian Americans overall do really well. But if we just focus on the big group of Asian Americans, we miss so many people. We miss the fact that although Indian, Chinese, and Korean and Japanese Americans are well represented in the science and engineering, other Asian subgroups don't have the same opportunities or the same access. We can't fix the issue if we can't see the issue, and that's why the data is so important. And that's why I'm really proud that thanks to this White House initiative and OSTP and other agencies' roles in it, we are disaggregating the data. We are seeing more of our communities and our needs and our experiences in the data that's going to inform decisions than ever before. It's also important that I'm here because for researchers, you know that for all of us, it's been a tough time in dealing with anti-Asian prejudice and bias and discrimination. That has definitely affected the Asian American researcher community, especially those of us, our brothers and sisters with ties to China. So ethnic Chinese researchers are being cast under suspicion because of their alleged and imagined ties to the government of the People's Republic of China. And that has led to a lot of bias incidents and hate. So it's my job and all of our jobs to make sure that when we carry out policies that confront the real threat that the People's Republic of China does pose for many of our national interests, that we do it without anti-Asian discrimination, violence, or hate. And that's important for me and all of us to be able to carry forward from our positions. So I can say, I am an Asian American researcher with extensive ties to China. So I can promise you, when I talk to Asian American researchers, it's personal. I'm doing this because it is part of me as well. We all need to feel safe. Now for LGBTQ data, what's also important is, again, we need to be seen and to be counted. So I'm very proud that among the many executive orders President Biden has signed, embedded in that day one equity EO was the path to the LGBTQI plus EO that President Biden signed a few years ago. And in that, we established a SOGI data working group. Does that sound really geeky? It is. SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity data. I hope you've also seen that we are beginning to be able to see ourselves in the data. The surveys, if you filled out some of the community surveys or health surveys or education surveys, we're gradually beginning to ask about sexual orientation and gender identity, because we need to be able to understand who we are. And for my area, sciences and engineering, right now, the federal government does not collect information on sexual orientation and gender identity. That means I don't know whether gay scientists are underrepresented, well-represented, overrepresented. Don't have that data. And therefore, we can't take action to improve the real conditions that LGBTQ scientists face in their research environments. But good news is that we are beginning to. And this year, the National Science Foundation is going to field for the first time questions for PhD scientists on their sexual orientation and gender identity. So how does it get back to being personal? Well, for the first time, pretty soon, I will be counted as a Japanese American gay scientist in the social sciences. So yes, I'm seen. We are all going to be seen. And that's why it's so important for us to be here. And I tell you, I mean, I see you. I feel really seen. I've been out since 1985. And so it has taken 39 years for me to be in a room like this, filled with so many of you. And best of all, this room is in the White House. So we are about to have a big White House group photo of all of us. And, little like 16-year-old Kei Koizumi from Columbus, Ohio. I mean, this is a big deal. It has taken this long, but it's been worth it. And I know we're going to continue to do great work together. Just a sample of what I'm doing. But, together, we are really going to keep embodying the change that we want to see in this world. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Kay. This really adds some historic framing for this gathering today. So thank you so much. So as you mentioned, well, first, I just want to give another thank you to all the speakers that we've had from the administration today. If we could give a quick round of applause for everyone who's spoken. And now you can get up and we're going to take this group photo at the White House. Let's try to see if we can get the Pride Month convening in the background here, just to make sure we remember what we were all here to do today. All right, feel free to come up. Gabe, you're gonna, yeah.
Yeah, if everyone could just come up here and we'll move these chairs. Mic down. I know it's easy to mic drop. That was a mic drop. So maybe. That was good. Also, over here, let me edit.
And thank you for all our guests who are joining us for the photo. Please take off your guest badge just for this picture. Again, please take off your guest badge for the photo. Thank you.
On camera. Can you do chairs? Yeah.
We need tighter, so everyone turn, make it tight, don't be afraid of each other. Our girls, we like each other. So, walking some of the folks on the third row. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Hold on. 3, 2, 1. One more. 3, 2. Okay, there you go.
Okay, while we get settled back into our seats, if I could just invite our panelists. Dr. Samoa, thank you for coming up. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being part of that historic group photo. I'm now excited to kick off the second part of our program this afternoon. We have an expert panel of community perspectives to explore the shared and unique challenges that face our Cutie Pie Asian American LGBTQI plus communities. So we're fortunate to be joined by an incredible lineup of advocates, researchers, and allies who are joining us both remotely and in person. I want to introduce first our moderator for the panel. It's so funny. I'm like looking at you from the back of your head here.
I look better from the back.
Yeah, so Dr. Reynolds Samoa is a commissioner on President Biden's Advisory Commission on AA and NHPIs. Also an endocrinologist. Oh, I said that correctly. Endocrinologist at the City of Hope Clinical Research Center in California. His current research projects include a faith-based community-centered diabetes prevention program in the San Gabriel Valley. He served as the lead for the National Pacific Islander COVID-19 response team and has authored several manuscripts describing the impact of COVID-19 on Pacific Islander communities. He's also currently the technical assistance lead for the Healing Association, excuse me, of Pacific Islander physicians. Dr. Samoa, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, these descriptions are a little bit old. So my latest research is in equity, health equity for queer and trans Pacific Islanders, or Cutie Pie. I myself identify as a Cutie Pie. The term has come about not only because it's cute, but because indigenous queer and trans Pacific Islander identities don't map well to the current SOGI categories. IK, talking to you. And so I myself identify as a Fa'afafine, which has been kind of hijacked to mean male to female transgender, but in our cultural context means so much more than that. And so in Western societies, I identify as gay cis male, but the Fa'afafine part of me is more consistent with who I am and my identity. So enough about me. We'll go on because I'm so excited for you guys to hear from our panelists. We're really lucky to have them all in one place. We'll start with a couple of our virtual panelists. Amasai Jeke is the Speak Change Program Coordinator for Utopia, Washington. Amasai is an indigenous feminist activist and advocates for gender equality and LGBTQI rights. With over a decade of experience, she's worked with organizations like the Rainbow Pride Foundation Fiji and Youth Voices Court, and currently serves as the System Policy, Environment, and Cultural Change Program Coordinator for Utopia, Washington, focusing on climate and environmental justice. Also joining us virtually is Aruna Rao, founder and executive director of Desi Rainbow Parents and Allies. She's a proud parent of queer and transgender young adult and the founder of executive director of Desi Rainbow, which provides support, education, and advocacy for diasporic LGBTQI plus South Asian Americans and their families. She's deeply committed to building a world where all LGBTQI identities are affirmed and celebrated. Also joining us virtually is Ikaika Regidor. Ikaika is a Kanaka Maoli Mahu, born and raised in Kaimuki, Oahu. As the Education and Training Coordinator at Papa'ololokahi, the Native Hawaiian Health Board, Ikaika's kuleana includes Mahu LGBTQ plus health, tobacco prevention, managing the organization's training function, and overseeing its intern program. Ikaika holds an undergraduate degree in early childhood education and a Master of Social Work degree, and is an Olapa Hula in Halau, Uno Keahi. And then we have joining us face to face is Wen Tran. Uses he, him pronouns, and he's a social epidemiologist with the PrideNet and the Pride Study at Stanford University School of Medicine. He holds a PhD and MPH in epidemiology from Drexel University, Domesday School of Public Health, and a BS in Public Health from the University of Texas at Austin. Prior to joining the Pride Study, he was a former graduate research fellow for the Health Equity Advancement Lab, whose long-term goal is to advance HIV PrEP access and prevent opioid-related overdoses among people who use drugs in Philadelphia. In his current role, he applies training epidemiology, data science, and causal inference to conduct and support engaged research that addresses the health priorities of queer and transgender communities with the goal of advancing health equity for these populations. And then lastly, we have Krish Segal, and uses they, them pronouns, is a licensed clinical psychologist and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging expert. Dr. Chris lives and works at the intersection of multiple minorities' identities and provides multicultural evidence-based therapy and support to individuals who live at these intersections. They work with minoritized individuals to help them deal with the impact of racism, homophobia, transphobia, and the intersections thereof. As a DEIB expert, Dr. Chris facilitates the development of multicultural competence and allyship skills and the implementation of best practices to create equitable environments where all individuals can thrive. Currently serves on the National Queer Association Pacific Islander Alliance, or NCAPIA board. Can I get a round of hands for our panelists? Because nobody lives here and everybody responded last minute to this invitation. So I think it's shows you how important gathering like this can be. So I'm gonna act like I don't need glasses, and we'll start with our first question. One second. So our first question, and mind you, we have 45 minutes, but that goes by really quickly. So I'm gonna ask you to try to keep your answers succinct as possible. Would you briefly share the impact of your work for Cutie Pie and Asian American LGBTQI plus communities? And the second part of that question is, what drives you to do this work?
Do we go first?
Sure, you can go first, Queen Ama.
Bulavinaka and happy Pride, everyone. Good morning from the Pacific Northwest. I first want to acknowledge the land that I currently occupy, the indigenous people, of course, Salish people, Makushut and Duwamish and Puyallup nations. And I want to thank the White House, especially Dr. Sambo and everyone, for having me to be part of this conversation. I think for me, really, the impact of our work here at Utopia, Washington is the services that we continue to provide for queer and trans Pacific Island people, but then we're also able to then expand on our current work. We recently opened a community clinic, which is called Mapumaya, a Samoan proverb of to come and rest. And we've kind of expanded this free community health clinic to the wider community to be able to access free healthcare. And also for me, what brings me to this work is really, it's personal and political, and the political is personal. I don't come into this work by myself or for myself. I know that I come with a lot of people that come with me in this work. And I also want to acknowledge that I stand on very fierce shoulders of Black trans women who have able to pave the way for a lot of us to continue this amazing side of work here in diaspora, but also amazing, strong Fafafine, Leiti, Vakasalia, Mahu, who have paved the way for someone who is young as me to be able to walk on the streets and live fearlessly as a Vakasalia Lewa. And sorry, my name is Amasai, she, her pronouns with Ethiopia.
Thanks, Alma. Everyone's so polite. I'm gonna go over to Chris. Would you please respond?
I'm representing NCAPIA here, and it's the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance. We are a federation of LGBTQIA API organizations, and our mission is to build organizational capacity of local LGBTQ groups and provide support to them. We also look to expand collaborations with allied organizations, and we promote social justice and equity values. We also engage with the initiatives, educational workshops, community events, policy advocacy to make sure that the voices of LGBTQI AAPI folks get amplified. For me, and I think for folks who work for and are on the board of NCAPIA, I think there's a profound sense of responsibility towards the lives of our community members. NCAPIA is all about community and collaboration. And so, and we all have a personal connection to these communities, right, that we live in and work in and ally ourselves with. And so it's really important for us to be doing this work, and I'm really excited to be here. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Ikaika, aloha. Can you share your manatu?
Aloha kako. My name is Ikaika. I use Oya, they, and he pronouns. I am coming to you from the Pa'iaina of Hawaii in Honolulu, Hawaii. As it was shared earlier, I'm the education and training coordinator for Papololokahi, and our kuleana at Papololokahi is to raise the health and well-being of Native Hawaiians everywhere. With regards to this work, I think it's important, right, that we look at how our kanaka mahu have always been a part of our ohana, right, and that that although we've been ostracized historically post-contact, that we've always had a seat at the table. So I think when we're looking at the work that we're doing and the impact, I think the first and foremost was really just going around and talking to mahu. We just wrapped up a listening tour of mahu from across the island chain, but also our mahu that are living in diaspora on the continent, to really talk about sort of what are the needs and challenges that they're experiencing. How do we identify? Where do we feel like our role is within the greater Lahui, the greater sort of like Native Hawaiian sort of fabric? And what is our kuleana, what is our responsibility for our kupuna, for our elders, for our lahui, right, for our greater community. And so I think that's really been helpful for folks to feel like they've been heard, and also that we can begin to sort of forge ahead what we feel like we should be contributing by us, for the greater lahui. So, mahalo.
Thank you, Kaika. Win?
Thanks everyone for having me. My name is Win. I use he, him pronouns, and I am here as a representative of the Pride Study and Pride Net. And so our organization is really focused on health research for LGBTQIA+ communities. And a couple of the ways that we do that is through our longitudinal cohorts, one of the largest longitudinal cohorts of LGBTQIA+ people in the United States. And our team, our co-directors, Dr. Juno Obed-Maliver and Dr. Mitchell Lum, knew from the beginning that if we were to truly understand the health of LGBTQIA+ people, we would really need a longitudinal cohort to understand how these exposures of social stigma and discrimination, how they then impact our health. That's one of kind of the core things that is part of our team. The other piece that we do is really around community engagement. So our team consists of two groups, the community side and the research side. And in the community side, we have done work around locally in the Bay Area to have events, to have people come in to come and complete the survey. We invite local drag performers around the area to come and sort of create an environment, a safe environment for the community to participate in. We also we also recently just had our biannual Pride conference, where we invite all of our community members to come in and present their feedback on the things that we've been doing, where we can improve, and how we can move forward. And those are some of the community-based events that we've been doing in our time. And where I come into this work is very personal for me, is because for a long time, I grew up in Houston, Texas, and it's not always the most inviting environment. And so I came into this work really with the goals of doing something in service of my community. Because for so long, I've just been isolated in an area that has not done that. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That leaves Aruna.
Yeah, hello everyone. Such a pleasure to be here today. I'm just really excited to be part of this panel. Wish I had been part of that historic photograph. My name is Aruna, but pronouns are she and hers, and I'm the executive director of Desi Rainbow. Desi Rainbow is the only national organization that provides support, education, and advocacy for Desi or South Asian LGBTQI folks and for their families. So we started our work as a nonprofit organization in the fall of 2020, and we've served over 3,000 people since then. Our focus is building community and intergenerational allyship, bringing parents and allies together with LGBTQI folks to build understanding and trust between generations, and also to advance the understanding of LGBTQI issues and advocacy. So I founded this organization after my own child came out as queer and trans. And at that point I was floundering. I really couldn't find any resources that really addressed all the intersectionality that I was facing as an Indian American immigrant, as a mother, as someone who really didn't have any kind of understanding of out queer and proud folks. So one of the things that I did was look for a lot of resources, and my inclination is to build resources when none exist. So I actually, after my own family got to the place where we were comfortable, I decided to build a resource for the South Asian and the Desi community. And that's really like something that has become a tremendous resource nationally for the South Asian community. Because we started our work during the pandemic, we focused a lot on virtual community building. So we still continue to bring together people from across the country and even abroad. We get folks in from Canada and from other diaspora communities on our ongoing support programs. But of course, since then, we've also started organizing locally. So we have people joining in local communities in places like Chicago, Atlanta, New Jersey, the Bay Area, LA, Houston, and Seattle as well. So our focus is really doing both the virtual community building and the local organizing as well.
Thank you so much. I think we're extremely lucky that we have such a variety of lived experiences, as well as disciplines on this panel. So I think you're able to speak to the threats to wellness that our communities face. So we're not going to do round robin. I want you to just sort of jump in when you feel like it, and you should feel like it, or you don't belong here. Um, so using the lens that you guys just mentioned, what disparities and inequities experienced by LGBTQI plus individuals are most concerning to you?
I can jump in. Sorry. Okay.
Go for it. Go for it.
Go ahead
Yeah.
and jump.
Figure out who's in person. But one of the things that we encounter on a regular basis, and in fact, actually the most important thing we encounter is concerns around mental health disorders and suicide. So I think the facts about LGBTQI mental health are pretty well known, particularly to this audience. The high rates of depression and suicide attempts, particularly among trans folks. So one of the frustrations that I think really directly correlates to what one of the earlier speakers was talking about is that there is so little disaggregated data around the specific concerns of DC people. So we have to repeatedly make the case for the intensity of the need around mental health. A parallel concern for us, particularly as an intergenerational and allied organization, is the mental health of parents and family members. So the majority of parents we work with are experiencing their own serious mental health issues that remain unaddressed, mainly because of the lack of culturally competent mental health and the lack of community support. And of course, besides mental health, the things that we see are lack of access to LGBTQ affirming healthcare, particularly gender affirming healthcare, and discrimination both in mainstream and ethnic community settings.
Thanks, Aruda. Win?
That was great. I guess I would add two more to that. Just what we see in the community surveys, challenges around body image and disorder eating is becoming a big concern, especially for LGBTQI plus AANHPI who are exposed to a specific form of gender racism, and how that sort of contributes to a body image as well as disorder eating. So we've seen a growth in community surveys among the community that reports this as a really important concern.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I can jump in if that's okay. Aman, I saw your hand go up too. I'll go first and then you go out. Okay, mahalo. Yeah, so I think a lot of points are that have already been made is amazing, right? Like data disaggregation, super duper important. I think specifically when we talk about cutie pie folks as well, right? I think when we think of we're also naming ourselves is important, right? Like if we use traditional sort of LGBTQ terms, that leaves me out as someone who identifies as Mahu, similar to how Dr. Samuel was talking about earlier, right? So I think even when we're looking at the data pieces, I think around mental health is super important. I think the thing that I would add as well is also when we look at sort of interventions to maybe mental health or anything that we do, right? The loss of culture component is also super important, right? Particularly for cutie pies, particularly for Mahu, those of us who have been pushed underground since Western colonial contact. And only now in the last 5 or 10 years have really begun to sort of reclaim that spot. I know that people, and as Amasai just said earlier, really eloquently, right? We are building on the foundation of our kupuna and our elders who've done this before. People have been doing this for a really long time. But I think we're at this saturation point, or growing towards it at least, where more and more people are identifying as Mahu. So then what does that mean culturally? And then when we think about mental health, how can we also weave in Aina-based education or land-based education, cultural components, hula, oli, mele, so dance, chant, song, farming, fishing, weaving, all these other components that maybe historically Mahu have also been a part of. How do we weave that back into our fabric of our everyday lives therefore supporting sort of other pieces too, right? So I think that sort of loss of culture is super important, and that's not even including, and I don't know if Amasami is going to talk about this as well, but like those of our folks that are living in diaspora, right? I have the fortune of still living within the Pa'iaina, living on this Aina, and having the everyday connection with that. But we also have Kanaka, we have Pacific Islanders who are away from home, and how do we support that, and what does that look like?
Thank you. Also to piggyback on that, I think a lot of the things that we don't often also address in terms of inequity within within our community is also the impact on climate and environmental justice. For too long, LGBTQI people have been left out in climate conversations, but we are very much part of the community that are equally impacted by the effect of climate change. And as queer and trans Pacific Island people, we also want to center this work to be able to center the work around healthcare, to also center those that are very further even marginalized within our own community, who are also sex workers, who are left out, even in parts of conversation that is very important. And I also want to say that we need to also start collecting data and doing research around the experiences of LGBTQI people, particularly in our community, who are experiencing the firsthand the inequalities of climate change. And we're seeing that even within policies, there's nothing that reflects the way that we are and the way that we're experiencing this. And for us here in Utopia, Washington, the way that we do this work around climate and environment, because it's also personal and political, because a lot of us who are not at home, we also want to ensure that this work is also taken back home, ensuring that by 20 years from now, we want to go back to our island homes, and we also want to ensure that there's a home to go back to. Right now, there's 6 Pacific Island countries that are 6 feet underwater. That's why for us who live here in diaspora also have the privilege to have this conversation with the White House, to have this conversation with leaders, to also center the work on climate and environmental justice. And we as queer people, we have the analysis, we have the lived experiences to shift a lot of this very important paradigms of conversation. And I also want to leave us by saying that when we do this work, whether it's really about intentionality and it's intersectional, let's not forget about sex workers who are within our community, who continue to struggle every day to make ends meet, and let's normalize those kind of conversations. Vinaka.
I just want to add a couple of things. We've talked about the mental health and access to gender affirming care. There's a lack of culturally competent providers, certainly. There's also the whole piece of education, right? Asian American youth, Asian Pacific Islander youth experience a lot of discrimination and bullying in schools. If you're also LGBTQ, that it just gets more complicated and more magnified. Historically, immigrant communities, we find support within our community, right, to deal with racism, et cetera. But then where do you go to for support around your sexual and gender identity, sexual orientation and gender identity? And then when you go out in the larger community, there's racism and bullying, and COVID has certainly not helped with that, right? I also want to add another piece of where, in terms of intersectionality, one of the things we are not looking at is disability, for instance, right? And or neurodivergence. There's a very high correlation. Now, correlation doesn't imply causation, as my data teacher always said, but there's a very high correlation of neurodivergence and gender identity, folks, right? But that's not, I don't hear this conversation in API communities at all. We also need more access to HIV prevention and education and treatment access. So I think those pieces are still needed.
100% agree. I think a lot of the homophobia and transphobia that we experience sort of in our cultural spaces are somewhat products of settler colonialism. You know, there's this very strong need to uphold um, the gender normalization of roles and the binary. And what I see is that defense oftentimes is rooted in sort of Western dogma and doesn't sort of fit some of the traditional language and cultural norms that we had that isn't influenced by um, uh, settler colonialism.
Add to that, one of the price of belonging in America is assimilation, right? Historically, regardless of which group. And so to assimilate, you adopt the binary, you fit in as much as you can, and that puts a lot of pressure for, and you can understand immigrant communities doing that because survival depends on that. And so I think we adopt that, but it doesn't serve our communities in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think some of the pushback that we have in our cultural spaces is having that genuine conversation about what are you actually trying to defend here? What is it that you're trying to uphold? What values are you really trying to instill? And then, you know, because I think the big thing that we have in cultural spaces is people often say, why do you always have to separate yourself? And I do have to say, one of the things we found in our research is that it is by grace that cutie pies have not called upon themselves to stand out so that there would be peace in the homes, peace in the communities. But they did it at the cost of their own mental health and wellness. And so I think this generation is realizing that that is not sustainable. Anyway, I'm so glad I'm not on the panel because I take off 40 minutes, period. So with that being said, the topic of pronouns is really complicated. Would you share why and how certain terminology impacts cutie pie, indigenous, and LGBTQI plus individuals? Please, anyone take a stab.
So I think of pronouns as a sense of belonging. The pronouns we adopt and the descriptors we use allow us to have a sense of belonging in our own bodies, right? Whenever I do this really basic training around pronouns, one of the things I ask people to do, and I'm not asking you to do this, is change your shoes, right? Put your right shoe onto your left foot and your left shoe onto your right foot, even for 10 minutes. It's really uncomfortable, right? Now imagine a trans person, and this is very, very oversimplified. So you're walking around with that discomfort in your own body every day, how hard it is to navigate life that way. And so it's very hard to create a sense of belonging in the world if you don't belong in your own body, right? And I think pronouns are a way of belonging to ourselves, but also to our communities.
I wanted to share that, the issue of affirming language, including pronouns, is something that families really struggle with because many of us are coming from contexts where the colloquial language that we grew up with that addresses LGBTQI identities is definitely not affirming. So we kind of struggle both with English and of course our native languages on how to speak amongst ourselves, how to speak to our children. And of course, as you mentioned, Dr. Samodha, the issue of the colonial legacy of, codified homophobia, transphobia that we're all carrying, that's also something that we bring with us. And one more piece, I think, that affects South Asians, at least the immigrant community that I'm familiar with, is that most of us who come as immigrants are sort of frozen in time in our assumption of what our cultural heritage is. So for instance, I myself came in the 1980s, and even though things in India have changed dramatically in the past few decades, my understanding many times, the understanding of people like me is kind of frozen in that in that time frame, in that context. And so I think immigrant communities have particular difficulties around changing the cultural framework and also the language that we associate with LGBTQI identities. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done within our immigrant communities. For instance, Desi Rainbow is working right now on a workbook for parents and allies about gender and sexual diversity. So we're trying to kind of reach the community with an idea of these are the things that we may have carried with us, but there's also like an older legacy of affirming language and affirming cultural frameworks that we can use.
Thank you for that. Any other responses?
Yeah, could I jump in?
Yep.
Hello. Yeah, so I think as I sort of mentioned in my last sort of kind of moment in the spotlight, I guess. But right, is that I think we're rediscovering language. I think particularly for Cutie Pie folks, because of colonialism and all of that, right? The violence of the erasure of our language, I think also impacts sort of who we are as individuals. How do we take on the mantle and the responsibility of these roles that have historically been there if you don't have the language to describe what that is? So I feel fortunate, I think in Hawaii at least, Mahu, though it has been pushed underground, there's a continuation of the work that's actually happening. I look at some of our other Pacific Islander cousins, our Chamorro cousins that are also rediscovering language. I look at sort of our other Pacific Islander cousins across the Moananui Akea, who even within sort of their island systems, right, different islands had different names, like our Fijian cousins, right? And so, right, how do we discover that? And then once we get that language, then we can begin to kind of build on the foundation of what our roles have been. I think about recently there was FestPac, there was a gathering of Pacific Islanders in Hawaii, right? And I noticed that behind the Tongan princess, there's Mahu, there was Hinele Moana Wangkalu that was behind there, right? Supporting the Tongan princess. I look at sort of our Samoan delegation and seeing Fa'afafine within the Samoan delegation, right? Taking up these cultural roles, taking up our space within sort of the greater tapestry, and also being able to sort of show the world that we've always had that space. One last thing that I'll say, and then I promise I'll stop talking, right, is that with regards to pronouns, in Olelo Hawaii, in Hawaiian language, we have a singular pronoun, oya. And oya is he, she, or it, right? It is the all-inclusive sort of pronoun that we would use regardless of one's gender, which really kind of underscores, as Hina would say, as Kumuhina would say, right? Like that it is less about sort of genitalia or any sort of other sex characteristics. It's how you show up for the lahui, how you show up for your ohana or your family, how you show up for the greater society, and what roles you're taking with regards to that really matters within our cultural context. So language, and then kind of building on that with regards to our kuleana.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that because, oftentimes, like we're met in cultural spaces with the argument of pronouns. And this is usually by community members that I'm like, you don't even like speaking English. Like, what is it that you're so strongly trying to defend against? And eventually, I think the conversation before used to end there. Whereas now, we're able to say with a lot more evidence that, the products of colonialism, such as toxic masculinity, the subjugation of women, they hurt you. They hurt you. And so, being aware of our queer and trans identities that are consistent with our cultural identities is a reclaiming of our indigeneity, and so that only helps you. But anyway, I digress because I can go on. And so that.
To Samoa, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Ama.
Yeah, I just want to, just say that there's a brown paper that's coming out that is written by Dr. Samoa, Ikaika, and everyone who was part of the Cutie Pie Village, which is a collective made up of queer and trans Pacific Islander that live here in diaspora and also back home, who are really intentional about we need to start taking up space as queer and trans Pacific Island people so that we're able to do this collective work together. So this brown paper is coming out soon. We'll make sure that we share that with everybody, and it's something that you can use to really inform your work. It talks about the different identities within the Pacific region. You know, even the word Vakasalia Lewa was used in Fiji as a derogatory term to describe someone who is trans. But a lot of us who then took the word, reclaimed it, and said, no, you use it against us, we'll use it to really redefine who we are as Vakasalia Lewa, who have been here for so long and been a part of community. So please look out for the brown paper. It's an amazing paper that's put together by an amazing group of people who are really doing this work. Thank you.
Binakaama. So with that, I'd like to get to what are some of the examples of community-led efforts that promote policy and systemic changes to improve the lives of QTPI and Asian American LGBTQI plus communities?
I can start this one if that's okay. So at the Pride study, we are working with the National Institute of Health with their All of Us research program. For anyone who's not familiar, the All of Us research program was an initiative by the Obama administration aimed to collect survey data, biomedical data for 1 million US residents that are underrepresented in biomedical research. And we are fortunate enough to be one of their community advisors and to think about how this data collection, it can be supportive of communities, how it's led by communities. So we convene multiple advisory groups to help inform this, and including, advisory groups on, Black Americans, Hispanic and Latinx Americans, advisory group for people living with disabilities, as well as an AA and NHPI advisory group. And these groups really help focus the direction in terms of how we engage with the community in terms of this data collection regarding the historical stigma that institutions have inflicted that then ultimately create the mistrust that communities have of institutions. And this is through multiple initiatives to reach communities where they are through, we have a mobile van that drives across the country to recruit and engage with communities. We have images to reflect the diversity of people in the communities. And so so we do a lot of efforts around, making sure that initiatives are reflective of the diversity of communities in the US.
Excellent.
So I actually have a list, so I'm going to use my phone. So organizations like NCAPIA and API Equality LA have been instrumental. We've been advocating for inclusive healthcare policies. API Equality LA worked on initiatives to train healthcare providers on cultural competency and advocate for the inclusion of gender-affirming care in insurance plans. Asian Pacific Islander queer women and transgender community has organized campaigns and lobbied for the passage of non-discrimination ordinances at local and state levels. The Banyan Tree Project, it was led by Asian and Pacific Islander Wellness Center, now San Francisco Community Health Center, provides culturally competent mental health resources and support systems. The Apicha Community Health Center has been providing education around HIV prevention and access to testing and treatment. The Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance and Asian Pride Project have advocated for comprehensive immigration reform that was really important to our communities. Another one I'd like to highlight is the Southern Nevada Asian Pacific Islander Queer Society. They support LGBTQI individuals who are Asian Pacific Islander and Desi American. They create safe spaces, organize community events, and advocate for the unique needs of QTPI individuals in Southern Nevada. So that's just an example, representative sampling.
Thank you so much for that. You had mentioned a couple of things throughout that speak to sort of policy and systemic change, such as the Mapumaya Clinic, which I think is the first cutie pie clinic, if not the world, at least in the United States, where they conduct gender affirming care. I know this because I helped train them. And there's also things that I see in the federal government too that's been pushed at the grassroots level, such as Kay and the SOGIS committee, which I'm really, really glad he sits on, but doesn't have any cutie pie representation. So I think some of the things that we really have to figure out is how do we support each other as two distinct communities. And so, you know, we have made like specific sort of amends to remember that cutie pies only speak for cutie pies. That when we are in shared spaces, that we do not speak for our Asian sisters, brothers, that they need to be at the table as well, because we expect the same, because representation matters. And it is so difficult because we're all under the Asian moniker, but there are so many different types, you know, there's so many subgroups and intersectional identities that we constantly have to check ourselves and remember who's not at the table and make sure they come with us. I think that's the important part of, like, as we're improving our data collection, that we always sort of remember that we have to support each other. So I think we're getting close. So we have one last question. What changes centering cutie pie and LGBTQ plus Asian Americans would you recommend to promote their safety in and out of AA and NHPI community spaces?
If I can speak to something that is kind of of particular importance to Desi Rainbow and to the Desi community at large, I think there's a lot of like focus on the issue of building resources for crisis and for, you know, people who need that kind of support. I think there should be an equal emphasis on the work of prevention. And I consider all of the work that we do the work of prevention, preventing family violence, preventing homelessness, preventing you know, trauma before it occurs. And so I really want to underline the work that needs to be done with families, because without that work, essentially all of the things that we see happening to the LGBTQI community continue to keep happening, you know, generation after generation. So I think one of the things to like really consider is the work, for instance, research that's come out of the Family Acceptance Project, or, you know, the Sherpa Project has also gathered data which essentially indicates that the presence of affirming adults, parents, community, elders in the community has a tremendous impact on LGBTQIA youth health overall. And so I think this really is the key to kind of doing the work of prevention and making sure that future generations have the chance to continue sort of living the life and not just like surviving, but also thriving. So that's something that I would keep underlining over and over again. And I did want to point out that there's a host of AAPI LGBTQI organizations that do this work. There's Okairi that works with the Japanese American community. There's Korean American Rainbow Parents, and there's also, of course, API of PFLAG that does exemplary work with families to do this work of prevention.
I'm so glad you said that, Aruna, because I think one of the things that we still are trying to figure out as individuals is how do we interrupt the space and do it in a way that's culturally respectful, but still impactful. You know, like you said, I think the last sort of reports show that about more than 70% of trans children have at least tried to commit suicide at least once. And that number goes down when you have access to gender affirming spaces. That number goes down when you have access to supportive cultural environments. That number goes down when you're out to at least one parent. And all of those numbers are significantly low in A and NHPI youth. And so I think now we have enough evidence to say, hey, not only what you're saying or what's happening in our cultural spaces is not only is it disrespectful, it's putting our kids at risk. You know, it's threatening not just their wellness, but their lives based on the data that we have now. And so interrupting spaces, I think, is going to have to happen more often. And we're doing such a better job at it. Like, I love that Kay is now interrupting that space. I myself oftentimes have to remind physicians that being affirming is oftentimes different from what they're doing. You know, we had in our Cutie Pie wellness study, 45% of them said that the doctor or nurse treated them with less respect and poor service, you know, and 25% said that they thought the doctor was afraid of them, you know. And so I take those numbers to my own like community in a space that you're supposed to be safe in, like healthcare, and I present it to my community as an embarrassment. Like, you know, this is where we're significantly failing. And I know you think your intent is to do no harm and to do the best for your patients, but you have a big blind spot. We have 3 minutes, and so I want to end it with any type of thoughts you'd like to leave our group here. And if you don't have any thoughts, then we can end it with karaoke. But right, right. So we'll go around round table to give your last thoughts, and we'll start. Aruna, would you mind leading us?
Sure, though I do like the karaoke idea. So I think one of the things I have learned from being here and listening to all of you is the sheer wealth of information that that we have to share with each other. I think we are siloed. This umbrella that we're all under is so vast that we don't necessarily kind of speak to each other about the kinds of things that we're doing and the work that we can share. So I would love to see something come out of this where I learned from the Cutie Pie sort of work that has been going on. I learned from the API work that's been going on, and we can bring these resources to our community and collaborate.
Thank you. Win?
I want to double on what was just said. I think one of the challenges that the PRIDE study has is that we're really pushing for as much representation as possible in our data. And sometimes that comes as sacrifice about the specificity of the community that we want to serve. And so one of the things that, we recognize is that we need to increase the representation in our data. And we would love to, be able to collaborate with anyone that has very much vested interest and commitment in the work of supporting LGBTQIA+ communities.
Thanks, Win.
So, as a clinical psychologist, I think for me, I find this notion of safe spaces really interesting because no space can be really safe, right? But what I am now focused on and what I've realized after many years of clinical practice is how do we build communities that are actually resilient, and not just resilient, but also create safety in the sense, if any harm is done, that there are other community members who can step in and say, hey, did you just hear yourself, right? So that the person who's experiencing the harm doesn't always have to respond, because that adds to the trauma, that adds to the pain, and it makes it harder to be out. And so I think doing work across communities and building allyships is something really important. And I second what Aruna said. We are siloed, and I think collaborating and pooling resources and seeing what works and what doesn't work, I think can be really helpful for all of us.
Thank you. Amma?
Yeah, thank you so much again. I just want to say at a time when our bodies and who we are as Cutie Pie people, as LGBTQI people are being capitalized right now, I also want us to be very mindful of we also always need to bring young people into this conversation because they are the hope and the dreams and the the manner that we look to as well to bestow knowledge upon them. And we need to always think of them in this work. But I also want to say that we need a lot of accomplices in this work. I'm tired of seeing allies come in and out who continue to gain and profit over our lived experiences, but give nothing to us. And I also want to say, when we talk about collaboration and partnership, let's have the foundations such as solidarity to ground us in the way that we do this, that the outcome will be about liberation, not just for us, but for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Ama. Kaika?
Yeah, I think I follow what everyone else said. I think the one thing that I would add, and I've been thinking about this, everyone else has been talking, right, is like, how do we enter into safety when we first start the conversation with each other? And I think too often I feel tokenized and pulled into the conversation where it feels transactional, right? And so that there's no safety in feeling transactional, at least for me, right? And so from a Native Hawaiian lens, we would say, we would build pilina, right? We would build connection. And so I would say, I think with regards to solidarity work, I think that do not fall victim to the urgency of time and then fall into the fallacy of having it be transactional, right? Like, build the connection with your partners, specifically cutie pie folks, right? And at least from a Native Hawaiian lens, like, it might take like a few 1-hour meetings of we're not talking business, we're just building pilina. And we need to be okay with that, right? Because that essentially creates the foundation in which we can build other things on, right? And the safety in which I can trust you and you can trust me, and then we can forge something together. So I think that, just remembering that it might take a little bit, and partly is because when we come into this work, we bring all of our elders that came before us with this work as well, right? And we're building a future for the future foundations, for our mo'opuna, our grandchildren and their grandchildren. So yeah, I think I would just note on that.
Thank you so much. Mahalo, Ikaika. So I just wanted to thank the Office of Public Engagement and WHIAANHPI for this wonderful event. A lot of it came because I opened my mouth. And what happens when you open your mouth is you have work to do. So I see on this panel and also around this room people that have opened their mouth a lot. And so that means we have work to do to break down these silos, and to continue to work towards justice, equity, inclusion, and belonging for all our communities. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much for participating in that panel discussion, for being with us. Thank you to our virtual panelists as well for being here to ground us in the work. And thank you, of course, to our in-person panelists as well. We are just about at time here. So I just want to give a quick final thank you so much for being with us today for the AA and NHPI Pride Month convening. Hope you have found it a meaningful experience. I want to give a special thanks to Erica Ninoy with the White House Initiative on NHPIs, who's critical in the convening as well. And the entire White House Initiative team for putting this together. So we have the space until 3:30. So no need to rush out of here quickly. Just make sure that you pick up a surprise on the way out. And otherwise, thank you all so much for being with us today, and hope you have a good one. Take care. Happy Pride Month.